Hello everyone. So you probably remember just before we went on our summer break, we had a look at this set of tarot cards. And I mentioned that tarot initially was a card playing game. And it's still used that way in some countries, like here in Austria. I think in most English language countries, that's not really the case. So I figured let's come back to not this deck in particular, but tarot in general. And I'll tell you a little bit about the card playing game. Let's put these aside. I think we could start with this one, the Visconti-Sforza deck. Some of the oldest tarot cards that we know of. And then we can also have a look at this deck here by Piatnik, Tarock. This is a deck that you can buy in pretty much any store here in Austria that has a game section. So pretty much a standard one. But let's start at the beginning, so to say. This here is the Pierpont Morgan Visconti-Sforza Tarocchi deck. So Tarocchi, you can see here, the German one too is called Tarock. So the German one's from the Italian name Tarocchi, and what we know in English as Tarot is simply from the detour it took via France, where the name changed a bit. At the time though, when this was created, the cards were not called Tarocchi, they were called Triunfi. So that is a bit of a later edition. And you can see here, this beautiful deck is sold as a cartomancy deck as well. So one to tell your fortune. You get this little booklet here with explanations on the cards. But there are also some historical information in there. So when's this from? It's a 15th century deck, so probably early half of the 15th century, and it's from northern Italy. Visconti-Sforza refers to two people that are included here. Let's just see if we can get them out. Again, deluxe size cards. So we have Bianca Maria Visconti, this is here, wife of Francesco Sforza, painting attributed to Bonifacio Bimbo. And here we have Francesco Sforza, who married Bianca Maria Visconti in 1441. Francesco Sforza was the Duke of Milan, so we are in northern Italy. Incidentally, same time frame and same era as recently when we talked about the Voynich manuscript. That's probably also when that one was created. So a very creative and productive time, I guess, in that region. Indeed, Francesco Sforza was also friends with Cosimo de' Medici, for example, who lived in Florence, which was a flourishing center of the Italian Renaissance. As the Duke of Milan, he was quite a successful ruler, and this was apparently a happy marriage, even though there was a large age gap. They were 24 years apart, but apparently it worked out for them. Bianca Maria Visconti ruled in his stead when he wasn't in Milan, and also after his death until their son returned to Milan. The cards might have been a wedding present or maybe an anniversary present. We don't know for sure, but they were certainly expensive. They are hand painted. Oh, let's take them out for a second. And you can see here, for example, with the first card of the Fool, you have this gold background with the beautiful details. So these certainly weren't cheap. They are not numbered here. The Triomphe cards, as they're called, the trump cards. But they follow the same pattern that we've seen in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which was not always the case at the time. Generally, with Visconti-Sforza, we mean about 15 different decks, all of which are incomplete. There are over 200 cards, and most of them were created probably 40s too, but not all of them, so it's a bit of an umbrella term. This particular deck here, we've seen this, is also called Pierpont Morgan, which refers to the Morgan Library and Museum in New York, and sometimes it also adds Bergamo. This particular deck here is also called Pierpont Morgan, which refers to the Morgan Library and Museum in New York. And sometimes people also add Bergamo here to the name, because some of the cards are in Bergamo, some of them in a private collection, some of them in the Accademia Carrara, so they're in 3 different places. And this is the most complete of these Visconti-Sforza decks. However, 4 cards are missing. What they sell here is a complete 78 card deck, which includes stunning full-color reproductions of 74 mid-15th century Tarocchi cards, and then 4 cards recreated to replace the missing ones. Some of the missing ones we see here. Where do we have it? Right. The Devil, for example, is one of these missing cards. Unfortunately, it doesn't say what sources were used to recreate this card, whether it was taken from one of the other incomplete decks, whether they found some other sources, maybe a written indication of what it looked like. So this is, it's given, but we don't really have any info on it, which I find a bit sad. The other one that's missing from the Triomphe cards is this one here, the Tower, and then the 3 of Swords and the Knight of Coins. Some of these I find really funny in the way that they differ from the newer cards that we know, like this one here, Strength. We actually have this on the cover of the set here. And I think I said last time I really like this kind of gentle representation of strength. And this is the complete opposite, just beating the poor lion. There's a theory that this might actually be a depiction of Francesco Sforza to show his force and strength and power. I also like the chariot. Where do we have it? Right here. It's an actual chariot, unlike in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. But you can see here what's missing are the Egyptian elements. We don't have any Kabbalah symbols. So many of these occult aspects that we associate now with tarot are not present here. Other than that, they pretty much follow what we know. Here we have the world, le monde. And then we get to the suits. We have swords, king, queen, knight, and page. And then the pip cards. And again, same thing for staffs. King, queen, knight, and page. I really like this one here just for the colors. And you can see here, all of them are really, really blonde on these cards, which was very fashionable at the time. If you look at, for example, paintings by Titian, which are also from northern Italy, from Venice, many of the women are depicted with blonde hair. It was just considered particularly beautiful. And then on the pip cards, we have the motto of the Sforza family, which is un bon droit. So basically, with good reason, hope by right. It's an expression that's still used in French, un bon droit. In this case, the Visconti motto is usually translated with "to the good belongs the right," or "on the side of the law." Other medieval decks did differ from the way this is set up. For example, the Carriel Visconti deck adds 3 more cards, namely the theological virtues, so faith, hope, and charity. They also had 2 extra cards per suit, namely a mounted lady, so together with the knight, and a maid to go with the page. So you had king and queen, the mounted lady and the knight, and the maid and the page. And there are some theories over whether maybe this was created a bit later compared to the other decks, that maybe we've lost some, and there was already a kind of standardization happening with tarot decks. But then again, there's a lot of variety also afterwards. So I guess people were just being creative with these. Incidentally, we do know of an older one that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, which had fewer triumphi cards, fewer drama cards, and they showed Greek or Roman gods and heroes, so completely different approach. Alright, let's move forward in history. Basically, these cards became quite popular. They made it to France in the early 16th century, where, for example, the writer Rabelais speaks of le tarot. And while these were quite expensive to create, in France they were using the printing press to create cards, which means they were a lot cheaper and it was a lot faster to make them. So they started to spread pretty much throughout the entire continent. Up to 1750, we know tarot cards traveled all the way north, for example, to Sweden, all the way east to Russia. And of course, they also made it to the German language areas. In 1754, there is a book titled Regeln bei dem Tarockspiels, so Rules of the Tarot Game. And a couple years later, in 1759, Maria Theresia which we usually call Empress here in Austria, even though she technically wasn't Empress. She issued a tax on playing cards. So that tells you too that they were pretty popular. It was a high tax as well to finance the war against Silesia. The cards kept spreading throughout the entire Habsburg Empire, and they became really, really popular. In the 19th century, some person actually said the one thing that kept all of these feuding peoples of Austria-Hungary together was the game of Tarock, and called the entire empire Tarockanian. There are also many, many different versions to play that are being developed during that time, and many different kinds of cards. The one that we have here is sort of the standard set that's being sold today. And I'll just quickly show you some differences compared to the Tarock that you might know. So first of all, they recommend 2 different books. I had a look at this one by Wolfgang and Sedlaczek. If you speak German, this is a really great look at the history of Tarock and very enjoyable to read. And then here we can see this is Ferdinand Piatnik und Söhne. So Piatnik is very, very well known for the cards they produce. And I'll just quickly show you. I actually found this book in the library. And it includes a card here of Wilhelm Piatnik and Karl Piatnik. So I guess they were the sons, which are mentioned here. They are immortalized on one of the playing cards. And there are even some expressions that people said while they were playing, like Heiliger Piatnik schau ober, or der Heilige Piatnik rotiert im Grab. So basically that the Ferdinand and his sons reacted to your game, or that they might be angry with you. Maybe you didn't bring them any candles. So they were talked about as if they were saints. I find that pretty funny. Okay, but let's look at the actual cards. The first one we have here is called der Sküs, or Gstieß. This comes from French, excuse. It looks a bit like the Fool, right? The card functioned sort of as a joker initially. And when people played it, they would say, sorry, so for playing the joker. It's not actually related to the joker, though, just to make that clear. And so they would use French, they would say excuse, and that just became Sküs and eventually Gstieß. And you have here a second smaller harlequin dancing on the hat. And this little figure is a reminder of sort of the original cards that became popular in Austria. These differ very much in the imagery that we have on here, but they didn't always look like that. The kind of cards that became popular in Austria initially had Chinese imagery, so like dragons or just landscape, not directly from China, but sort of the image that you had in Europe of China. It was very popular at the time. And that's sort of one final detail that's left from these cards. We then have the kings. You can see here that this one doesn't use the Italian colors, but rather the French ones. Then we have the queens, the knights, and the pages. And again we have here Ferdinand Piatnik und Söhne, Wien. Before we get to the trump cards, we'll quickly switch to the end. This is a reduced set of cards. With the red cards, we only have 4, 3, 2, and ace. And with the black ones, 10, 9, 8, and 7. So that makes 54 cards. There are also decks that are even smaller, with just 40 cards, for example. Alright, and then here with these actual tarot cards, the trump cards, you can see these look completely different to what we've seen in the medieval ones. Again, there were many different ones, and this is a bit of a mix of different cards. We have some Rococo imagery here, so this would be older. And then we have many of these rural scenes from different parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. These became quite popular. Some of the cards were used to sort of celebrate the Habsburgs a little, especially after the failed revolution of 1848, when you went into the Biedermeier times, so everything was kind of very non-political. And for example, you just saw the successes of the Habsburgs or the different ethnic groups living in the empire. And when the Habsburgs, for example, lost Lombardia, the card was just quietly swapped out for Bosnia. On the top one here, 21, we have some Ottoman imagery on both sides with an exotic bird flying here, a parrot. And you might remember in the other tarot cards, 21 shows the world. And the world in French means le monde. And that sounds exactly like der Mond, which is the moon. So we have this little grumpy looking moon up here. On the other end of the trump cards, we have the card that gives the entire deck its name, Industrie Glück, which translates to diligence and fortune. In the early 19th century, industry didn't have the meaning that it has today. It sort of meant diligence. So maybe they were playing kind of with both connotations. After all, the Industrial Revolution did come to the Habsburg Empire as well, a bit more slowly, but it did arrive eventually. If you buy a deck like this, for example, in the Czech Republic, the card might look almost the same, but the writing might not be there. I think in some decks it's being replaced by something else, and sometimes you just have like a rock with a bit of pattern on it. And if we turn it, this looks like a rural scene as well, but it's actually quite an urban scene. We are looking at Vienna at the Hofburg Palace. It's just that the newest part of the palace here in the background is still missing at the time. So this would be where the fortifications were sort of just outside. And when those were gone, they added a lot of parks, other parts of the palace, opera, university, theatres, etc. One unexpected depiction is this one here. This clearly is not someone who lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, we have the depiction of a Scottish soldier. And that's because they fought on the side of the Habsburgs at some point, so they got immortalized in the Industrie Glück deck. But then here, this would be a Tyrolean scene on card number 5. Let's see, what else do we have? This is supposed to depict Silesia. This is meant to be Moravia, with some quite high mountains in the background. Here a bit further south, Istria, so near Trieste. Some of them I find quite funny, like this one here, where the guest obviously had a lot of wine and now it's time to pay and he's looking through his pockets on where to find some coins. She doesn't look too happy. I guess she's been waiting for a bit. Whereas here, this guy's just having a little sip out by the field next to this waiting donkey. And a similar scene here where this guy's being reminded it's time to go back to work. And this one, in the explanation, it just says it's the church on the Balkan, but it doesn't exactly say where. I guess you could probably identify this if you look more closely at the architecture, but I don't really know enough about that. So, and so on. So scenes from all corners. Some a bit older, some quite humorous. I also like this little detail here with the spilled milk that looks like a cloud forming. Well, and then we have the moon. The Skus, der Mond, and the first one, which is called Pagat, together are called die Troules. Again from French, tous les trois, all three. But I'm afraid I can't explain what exactly that means, or in fact, how to play this game. In Austria, Tarock is not considered a game of chance, but rather ein Geschicklichkeitsspiel, so diligence and fortune. The way it works is you play with 3 or 4 players, and I think the most common variant is called Königsrufen, so you call the king, and whoever has the king is your partner, but you don't know who your partner is. And since 6 cards are left in the middle, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It might happen that the king's in there, the one that you're calling. So at some point you might realize you don't have a partner. I'll be honest, it sounds a bit complicated, and I've been reading through some of the instructions, but I have a feeling they're mostly written for people who already know how to play Tarock. They just want to have a closer look at a specific variety. you can still find Tarock in most parts of the former Habsburg Empire, but it's often played in different versions. So in Austria, what's common is Königsrufen. I think in Hungary, a related variety is called 19er Rufen, so you call Tarock number 19. And I really like some of the stories that are being told in the book I showed you. How, for example, they went to a somewhat remote corner of Romania and found that people there played quite an old form of Tarock. And a couple of years later, they talked to a professor from Ukraine, from Czernowitz, and it turns out he played the same version. And the reason is that part of Romania was part of a region called Bukovina in the Habsburg Empire. And the capital of the Bukovina was Czernowitz. So even though these are two different countries now, the type of Tarock that's being played kind of stayed the same. Although I don't know how popular it still is today. In Austria, funnily, it's played by a lot of politicians. For example, famously, a lot of the chancellors, Franz Vranitzky, Wolfgang Schüssler, Wolfgang Mitterlehner is also really well known for playing Tarock, although he says in the book he started quite late. But apparently he's been playing so much now that he's known for it. No one in my friends group plays it though, and while we did play cards in our family, we played more versions of Rummy, which we call Römen where I'm from. So I'll keep a lookout if I can find someone who can explain the rules of Tarock to me, and then maybe we can come back to it at some point. We'll see how successful I am. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the different cards and how they changed over time. And ideally you've already drifted off to sleep by now. Either way, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next week with a German video, and then I'll be back with an English one in October. Until then, sleep well. Good night.